talking about e-commerce in the MENA region. So there's two challenging topics. One is e-commerce and the other thing is MENA. Just briefly about me, Mohammed Chbib. I'm Syrian of origin, born and raised in Germany, moved to Dubai first time, I think 2004. So ever since then, very passionate about the Middle East, probably because of my origin. Let me very briefly put it into context. So this is a standard chart to show how big e-commerce is in the world, so I'm not going to bore you with it. In essence, what it says is e-commerce is growing very, very fast, very quickly in the world. The growth rate in the last years and the growth rate expected for the next couple of years is around 15% globally. How does this look for the Middle East? Now, for the Middle East, the growth rate is expected to be, in the last year, I think it was at 45% year on year. Obviously, if you start from a low level, your growth rates are much, much higher. But for the next couple of years, it's expected to remain around 40 to 50% or even above. That is very interesting. So this per se tells you there's a lot of opportunities in the Middle East, in the e-commerce sector. What specifically? If you look at it, all reports globally indicate that the Middle East is the top retail market. So the biggest growth potential for global retailers lies in the Middle East. And you see a lot of them looking at the Middle East these days. Global brands, global retailers, all are coming to the Middle East. How does the population look like? And we'll go into a little more detail in a minute. High GDP per capita. You know, the Middle East, if you think about MENA, you probably think about Dubai, maybe Saudi Arabia. I'm pretty sure you think about a lot of oil, a lot of big cars, etc. Now, we have the highest GDP in the region per capita, in the world per capita. I think number one is Qatar, has been Qatar last year. And I think UAE is among the top, Kuwait is among the top, you name them. Like all the GCC countries basically play one of the most important roles globally here. The internet adoption rate, if you look at that from beginning of this century until today, we have two-digit growth rates. We're above 100% penetration. In mobile, we are in most countries. We have, in general, internet penetration and broadband penetration, which is more important as an enabler for e-commerce, that is growing faster and is continuing to grow even in the less developed countries, i.e. not only in Saudi Arabia, not only in Kuwait, but also in countries like Jordan that is leading actually on the internet side in the Middle East. At the same time, we have, and that's also worth mentioning, we have a little turmoil in North Africa. You all witnessed what's happening in Egypt, you all witnessed what's happening in Tunisia, you all see what's happening in Syria right now. This is probably a challenging factor, but still what you see is companies like Rocket Internet, for example, they continue working in Egypt and they're very successful in Egypt as well. Companies from the region like Souk, for example, they are continuing to operate. So there is an opportunity to work under very difficult, challenging circumstances as well. And the Middle East, I think, is the perfect example, maybe next to Latin America for a situation like that. Okay, this doesn't show. Okay, what are the e-commerce, how does the e-commerce scene look like at the moment in the Middle East? Maybe that's as a starting point also important. Obviously fashion is what leads. And why does it lead? Because a woman cannot get enough shoes, and she cannot get enough handbags, she cannot get enough sunglasses, etc. pp. This is why e-commerce works in the whole world, fashion segment. That's very important. The first e-commerce businesses, I think, that became like scaling in a way that they became visible for global investors as well, were the so-called value players. So people like Marcafoni here in Turkey, people like, thank you, people like Trendyol here, similar businesses emerge in the Middle East. Right? Who are the players, just so that you hear some names in the different countries. So if you look at UAE, who are the ones with the biggest market share of the e-commerce scene? It's people like Souk, which is a general merchandise place like Amazon, people like Kabone, which is a Groupon clone, people like Amazon themselves who ship from Amazon US here. Obviously Aramex as a logistics provider, and you maybe heard the speech today, plays a significant role in shipping thousands and thousands of packages from across the world to the Middle East. So there is a big interest also from purchasing things abroad that are not available in the Middle East. You have Jordan, KSA, it's always the same names almost, right? Who are the consumers? We're looking at a consumer base of about 350 million people. Investors, when I speak to investors and they talk about my business, they usually ask, who is your consumer? What is your typical consumer? And I can tell you this is impossible to say. Just to give you an example, UAE, just UAE, You have 18% locals. You have, I think, about 20% Arab expats. You have about 55% what they call Eastern direct hires, which is Pakistanis, Bengalis, and Indian workers. You have Eastern expats, you have Western expats. The mix is amazing. If I look at our database, the mix is amazing. You just have to micro-segment probably more than in any other region in the world in order to understand the customer base, right? And I think this is the biggest challenge for players that enter the market, because they think, you know, an American company thinks, yeah, you know, I do some marketing and I get my customers. It's not true. It's not happening. Let me, just in the light of time, let me summarize key challenges. So we have challenges in the area of product sourcing, in the area of payment, market alignment, funding, local talent pool. These are probably the top challenges that we see in the region. Product sourcing, simply, you don't get products in the local market. Why don't you get products in the local market, especially in the fashion segment? Usually you have the big brand names. They sign a long-term agreement with some corporate player, which is amongst the big ruling families in this region, and they're exclusively tied as a distributor with one of these families. So you don't get from the local market. So what happens is all the startups that come up with these brilliant ideas, young people that are very passionate about e-commerce, they find a hard time finding products and they need to source them from somewhere else. Payment. You don't have payment providers. When I started the first startup I started in the Middle East, I think I sent emails and placed calls to payment gateways, I think to 7 payment gateways that I found online. None of them responded even. None of them picked up the phone. Only one picked up the phone and promised to call back. Was an assistant actually, never called back, right? And then you go there and you're like, hey, I want to connect to your payment gateway. Yeah, we need a security deposit of $50,000. Doesn't work that way, you know? So there is a big challenge. The second challenge here is, let's forget the payment gateway. Let's do it old school, like Middle Eastern people, you know? They go to the bazaar, like here. They pay cash, they get the goods, you know? This is the primary problem, I think, of e-commerce in the Middle East. They have a cash is king mentality. So the credit card penetration, I think, in e-commerce in Turkey is around 80%, 85%, I guess. For us, it's exactly the opposite. So when you ship goods, let's say to Saudi Arabia, people prefer paying cash on delivery. So what happens is I send 100 boxes cash on delivery to Saudi Arabia, 50 of them come back. Because in the meantime, the customer has changed his or her mind because they're not committed. If you don't pay, you're not committed. That obviously changes your cost structure, because you probably, if you ever did a startup, you have your business plan and you have an assumption, assumed return rate, which is what all investors talk to and what you as an entrepreneur look at. Assumed return rate, in a worst case scenario, 15%. We sometimes have to deal with 50% without even moving anything, right? And that's a big challenge. Market alignment. We have just the GCC, which is the core market that is active, and then take Jordan maybe in addition to that. You have borders between these countries. When I ship things, let's say with Aramex or with DHL, land freight from UAE, from Dubai to Saudi, let's say 1,500 kilometers drive. In Germany, this would take 1 day and the customer has the product. In our case, it takes 7-8 days, the lorry just waiting at customs. Not because they're not organized, it's just because they don't want to work. Or they have stupid systems. Or the guy at customs doesn't like the face, the truck driver's face. There are hundreds of reasons that are just not manageable, right? So what we are forced to do, we're forced to do air freight, right? Air freight costs a lot of money, especially when you get 50 returns back, etc. So that's a big thing. You need to get alignment. Funding, investment capital is difficult to source. If you look at the Middle East, they have billions of dollars. They all go into real estate in the US, in the UK, in nice towers in Dubai, and recently they're starting investing in Turkey as well, and in other Arabic countries. There's a big brand name culture, so unless you're a Gucci, Prada, etc., you're worth nothing. Everyone wants to wear this. No one wants to pay for it. You get some seed funding. There's a lot of people that you can excite because there's an entrepreneurial culture. So you get the first 100 to, let's say, $700,000. You get very easily. But then after that, the growth funding becomes a challenge. And probably the biggest challenge that I see in the Middle East next to funding is the local talent pool. Right? If I'm in Berlin and I shout, I need an SEO guy, I get probably 200 candidates, right? Without even a job ad. If I'm in Dubai and I ask for a SEO guy, I get an application that says a social marketing professional. You talk to this guy and then basically, you know, I can write tweets, and that's SEO for this person. That's literally what I have to deal with and what we all have to deal with, I think, in the region. So let's not only talk about challenges, let's go into potential solutions. How do we handle these challenges? So product sourcing, Very simply, we go gray market. We don't have any official source that we can go to. So we go gray market. We always fly frequently to Turkey, especially Istanbul, Izmir, and we find suppliers here. We need to make sure that we get original products because here they like mixing a little bit. So when you want to get good products, you go to Turkey. Turkey is an industrial market. You find everything you need in Turkey, and you sell it then in the Middle East. Or I would say, if I look at our sourcing structure being a startup that sells goods, actually we have probably 40% of what we sell comes from Turkey, 40% from Europe, 20% from the rest of the globe, including the Middle East. Payment. A lot of people have recently emerged into owning the last mile logistic process. Why? Because then they get the cash themselves. They try 100 times until they reach the customer. Because the logistics company tries maybe 5 times, but then they're like, you know what, the customer didn't want it. You need to tightly manage the process for cash on delivery to influence the customer. So what we do is when the customer places an order cash on delivery, we call the customer before we dispatch the good. We call on the phone minimum 5 times. Right? Because we want to get this personal relationship. We call and we mention our names. We call from real number, etc. pp. And still we have a return rate. We are probably better than most players at the moment, but our return rate still is somewhere around 15%, which I consider very high. Right? We have to work on market alignment, but I'm pretty sure all my colleagues in the segment will tell you how many conversations they had with the different governments, and yeah, I'm not going to go into that. Funding, I think the only advice I can give for funding is patience. Patience, patience, patience. And one typical pitfall most of the people in the Middle East do is, including myself, is you think you have a great business and the greatest business on the planet, but if you talk to 10 investors and they all give you the same feedback, you need to work on this and that, then you have to work on this and that because they're smarter than you usually because they see 150 businesses per day, you see only your 1 business per day. So this is another thing, and I would summarize it under humbleness. So try to be humble when you look at your own business, try to take advice from as many people as you can. Leverage international investors. I've been looking for the last business, for Desado, when I created Desado, I've been looking for 6 months for investors in the region, or 4 months, and then the last 2 months I decided, you know what, I'm going to go and tap my international network. And it took me 1 month to get 6 excellent investors that signed up international, not a single local investor. Okay?
Muhammad, thank you very much. Let's continue in the discussion panel because we have some really great people here on the stage. And thanks for this presentation. I think it was really very in-depth and interesting. And you gave so much information.